the way that this will work is that I'll be able to pretty closely imitate what we were doing in class. That you'll also be working together on this sort of group activity. You all should have it as an attachment in the email that contains the link. And then that you'll be able to sort of ask me questions like you normally would ask me questions during class on those. So that's the goal. Let's do a real fast review. So the daily assignment, so the group activity today is going to be about reductio, what are called the reductio ad absurdum arguments, right? These arguments are always critiquing or attacking some other position, right? And the way that the critique works is by arguing that the position that's being attacked produces some kind of absurd consequence, or that it has some unacceptable implication that the author hadn't, that the original sort of argument hadn't considered, right? So this is always a critique, first of all. So what is the reductio argument? Identify what argument is being attacked or what position is being attacked. The attack is the thing you're evaluating. Is it a good or fair attack that's being raised against some other position? And what will make it a good or fair attack? Well, it'll be a good or fair attack if it sort of avoids three mistakes, right? If it sort of satisfies these three criteria. So the first thing, the reductio ad absurdum argument, it has to actually point out an implication that's really absurd. If I was to say, your argument is crazy, it leads to everyone getting free, adorable, cute puppies, right? People usually like adorable, free, cute puppies. That wouldn't necessarily be an absurd implication, at least not to many people. So this one normally won't be a problem. Normally the implication will be pretty obviously problematic or absurd in some sense, but it's something to keep in mind and look for. Second thing, the argument has to avoid the straw person fallacy, right? It can't misrepresent the position that it's attacking. It's very easy to show that a stupid position produces stupid consequences, but if the position wasn't actually stupid, then you haven't really done any real work, right? Or the reductio argument hasn't done any real work. The last thing it has to do, it has to avoid the slippery slope fallacy, right? If you're going to draw out some sort of consequence, the consequence has to either be something that could plausibly follow from the position that you're attacking, or you have to justify why the implication will actually follow, right? So you should be a little bit familiar with the straw person and slippery slope fallacies from earlier in the semester. The reductio argument needs to avoid those two things. If the argument manages to avoid all three of these mistakes, right, if it satisfies all three of the criteria, then it's a good reductio argument. If it fails any of the three, it's a bad one. So that's just a little bit of review from last time. So any questions maybe on the homework problems or anything that anyone would like to ask before we break into the group activity? All right. Oh, I got a question here from the chat. Do we turn in the group work at the end of class through email? That's exactly right. Only turn in one copy per group by email, but just email it. You can reply to the link that I sent out. Just the easiest way I found to do this, just email the file back to me, right? And make sure it has your group number and everything of that sort on it. Good. Any other questions? For this group activity, pay special attention to problem number 2. Problem number 2 is probably the trickiest of them. One should be pretty obviously committing the straw person fallacy. One should be pretty obviously committing slippery slope. One is actually a Dilbert cartoon. It's actually this famous Dilbert cartoon that's an example of a reductio argument. So it's a joke. It's a little bit of a joke. Don't take it super seriously, but sort of try to evaluate it, figure out what's going on with it. But number 2 should be a tricky one. Spend some time in your group working on number 2 in particular. All right. I'm going to go through and add the people who just joined into the groups. There should be more or less the normal people in all of your groups. They should be basically the same. A few people did take the asynchronous option. I think every group lost one person as a result of that. I'm having to manually input these, so if anyone's in a group people you don't recognize, let me know. I can move you where you're actually supposed to be. And I think all of the groups should be large enough that, yeah, none of them should be especially small today. So, all right, I'm going to open up the groups, so join into them. Let me know if you press that little button if you have any questions. We'll plan on maybe 25 or so minutes for this, and I'll keep you updated about the time. I can sort of chat to all of you, so that's how I'll sort of keep in touch with you. All right, this will be interesting. We'll see how this goes. Any questions, just let me know. We'll figure this out. Oh, and you can all unmute yourself if you need to. Actually, I'll unmute you all right now. And so you should be able to chat within your groups as normal. All right, opening up the rooms. All right, I think everyone looks like they're back. Excellent. So did that go okay? Text, either send me a chat or I can, do the hand raise thing, and I'll call on people. That's, yeah. There we go. Go ahead. You should be unmuted. Oh, you're just giving me a thumbs up. Oh, you're just giving me a thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, awesome. So yeah, my hope was at least that would recreate the class dynamic well enough that we could sort of keep doing what we were doing. So yeah, hopefully that was successful. I think most of the groups have sent me an email by this point. If you haven't already sent me the email, just do it real fast. Get it sent out to me. So just real fast, go through the answers to them. Number one, that's pretty clearly a straw person fallacy, right? If we're not really justifying all the leaps. Number three, the Dilbert cartoon, while it's amusing and funny, I said that one was slippery slope. Sorry, one was pretty clearly slippery slope. Three was pretty clearly a straw person. The pointy-haired boss didn't mean we were gonna keep cutting the bottom 10%. He just meant like this one time we're gonna cut the bottom 10%. And while it was indeed an amusing or funny joke, right? Yeah, it is indeed committing the fallacy. 2 and 4 were both probably successful. 2 was probably relatively easy to see. What was the absurd implication in 2? Bill Gates isn't successful. Seems kind of silly. Bill Gates seems pretty obviously successful. Nothing seems like it's being misrepresented. And there's not an obvious straw person in case number 2. Go ahead. I unmuted you.
So we thought that number 2 would be a straw person because the person making the argument was generalizing to you, and the person arguing against them said that, like, assumed that they meant everyone.
Oh, that's interesting. No one's ever said that before with this problem. Actually, yeah, that's okay. I'm actually okay with that. I mean, at least that's at least an interpretation of that's not the interpretation I would have gone with, at least, but that interpretation makes sense, actually. Yeah, no one's ever said that before, but yeah, I guess you could indeed read it that way. This is actually a device addressed very specifically to person B, not advice that's supposed to apply universally. And if you read it that way, yeah, that actually does make sense. I'm okay with that. Yeah, but if it was addressed to everyone, do you agree it would be a good reductio?
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that's good. That works. And again, this is why with all of these you get the opportunity to sort of explain your answer, because the explanation is frequently what's going to determine if what you've said works or not, makes sense or not, and what you're saying works. That makes sense to me. Good. All right. And then I thought I saw another hand go up, but it's gone now. Did I? Okay. Go ahead, Robert. You should be unmuted.
Yeah, we made the same argument. It's from the same point of view that person A was specifically directing at person B, but really in particular, like that one part about there's a sentence in there that says, "So in your view, Bill Gates is a failure." That it definitely portrays like this totally unrelated person as like the opposite of like charitable. He takes it to an extreme, saying like, is that making any sense?
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And again, it's sort of funny, but no one's ever made this objection before. But now that you're making it, I should probably reword the problem, because yeah, the way I worded it does indeed allow for the way you're interpreting it.
And we debated about that because we said you could make an argument either way on this one. Everything both of you are saying seems fair to me. If you read this as if what person A is intending is really specific advice to this specific person and not making a general claim, then yeah, I think you're probably right that this would indeed be a straw person then at that point. So yeah, that reading of the argument works with how I've written it. Yeah, it wasn't what I was intending, but it works. So I am fine with that.
All right, let's go to number 4 now. Number 4 is probably the hardest one here. My guess is your group is trying to decide predominantly. So first of all, who's actually making the reductio argument? In this case, it's person A, right? Person A is making a reductio argument against person B's claim that taking the rock is morally acceptable because it won't hurt anyone. Okay. My guess is that what you spent most of your time talking about is, does this argument commit the slippery slope fallacy or not? Right? And that's indeed exactly the right question, right? And I'm going to say, no, it actually doesn't commit the slippery slope argument, and here's why. Number 4 isn't saying that if you take this rock, the part will in fact be destroyed. If it was saying that, it would be a slippery slope. They're saying if it's okay for you to take the rock, that would make it okay for everyone to take rocks, which means it's okay for the park to be destroyed by everyone taking all the rocks. They're not pointing to an actual consequence they think is really going to happen. They're saying the logic of your sort of moral logic underlying your position would make it okay if the entire national park was destroyed by everyone taking all the rocks. Go ahead, you should be unmuted.
So for that one, we thought that it wasn't doing the thing because the idea that the park would be destroyed if everyone took a rock isn't absurd.
Right, yeah, exactly. That's a great way. That's another way of putting it that I think works really well, right? Like, it's not actually crazy to say that the park would in fact be destroyed if everyone could take whatever they wanted out of the park, right? So it's not a slippery slope. It's not drawing an implausible implication of person B's position. It's drawing a plausible one and is not a slippery slope. Yeah.
But we also thought it wasn't the absurd thing.
Sorry, say come again?
We also thought it wasn't the reductio ad absurdum thing. Because So who were you seeing as making the reductio argument? Were you saying the person A was making it? But we just thought the idea that the implication of if everyone takes a rock, the park will be destroyed wasn't absurd.
Oh, you thought that wasn't absurd. So the idea of the park it being morally okay to destroy the park didn't strike you all as absurd? Okay. Again, that's surprising. No one's ever said that to me before, but that's okay. Again, that's okay. So how did you justify? Why did that not seem absurd?
Mostly we thought the conclusion was that if everyone took a rock, the park would be destroyed. Which was like what the conclusion they were drawing to. We didn't really bring morals into it, and we didn't think that part of it was absurd.
So at the very least, that would be one limitation in your answer. I'd have to see precisely how you wrote it. But at least that would be one, because very clearly, at least person A thinks this is a moral question. Right? They think that that's what's sort of at stake here, right? Their claim isn't just isn't just that you shouldn't take the rock. Their claim is in the sense that it would be immoral or wrong for you to take this rock. Okay. So at the very least, that would have to be part of the answer. But I'll have to look and see precisely what you wrote and how you sort of explained it to see how big of a deal that is given the other parts of what it is that you said. And one advantage of doing it this way, what I'll do is I'll email back all of these assignments with some comments on them, so I'll be able to sort of give you feedback on how you were doing with particular questions too.
Will you email them to everyone who?
What I'll probably do is I'll probably just have her email it to me, and then that person can email it to the rest of the group. That's would probably be, and again, that would probably be the easier way for me to do it, to sort of have you all distribute them amongst yourself. I mean, I know at least one group actually sent me a Google Doc that I believe they can all access. So I'm probably, for that group, I'll just write comments directly to them. But yeah, if you actually just send me back the Word file, which is completely fine, I'll probably just email it back to whoever gave it to me, and then you can sort of spread that around to the rest of the group. I have a few chat questions. Someone asked me if a PDF worked, and the answer is yes, that's fine. PDF's no problem. And then another person asked me to just do a quick rundown of successful or unsuccessful again. So one, pretty obviously unsuccessful. It commits the slippery slope fallacy. Two, if you read it, person A is giving general advice, it seems like a pretty good reductio argument. If you read it as being highly specific advice, as a couple of the groups wanted to argue, then you would say that it was a straw person fallacy. They misrepresented what person A originally intended. The Dilbert cartoon seems like it's a pretty clear straw person fallacy. The pointy-haired boss didn't mean that we were going to continually cut the bottom 10%, just that we were going to cut the bottom 10% this one time. And for probably that one's a pretty good reductio. I've at least never heard anyone make a good argument to me that it's not. But again, I'll go through and see precisely what it was, that how your group sort of put it, and see if anyone can make a compelling case to the contrary. So I hope that was a good quick rundown. All right. So hopefully this worked pretty well. I'm hoping this was a good way to sort of go through all this. What we'll do now, this took a little bit longer than I was planning on it taking, which is not surprising. So it's good to know at least that this will take a little bit longer than it normally would. What we'll do now, so my office hours are about to start, so I'll let you all go, but if anyone wants to do any sort of exam review, why don't we just turn this session straight into my office hours, straight into exam review, and we can just sort of go from there. If you need to go, or if you don't really feel like you need to do an exam review, go ahead, that's completely fine. Otherwise, we can sort of just stay in the group and people can ask exam questions. And we'll do that for basically as long as people want to go. My office hours run till 12:30, so we should have a good long while to do any sort of exam review anyone wants to do. All right. And you're gonna have to, and that means you'll have to ask questions. You'll have to ask questions of things on the exam that you would like us to go over.
I have a question.
Absolutely, go ahead.
How long are we going to have for our exam, and how many questions is it?
So it's gonna be, you'll have 75 minutes for the exam. The assumption, my plan is that you should need 60 minutes for it. So that's the idea. So I'm planning on it taking you 60 minutes, giving you 15 minutes of wiggle room in case I get it wrong. And I don't know exactly how many questions they're gonna be. Basically, there's going to be 60 points, and it should be 1 minute per point is my sort of expectation, right? So there's a couple like true-false questions that are worth 1 point. My assumption is those should take you about 1 minute, right? When we do the diagramming arguments, there'll probably be two categorical syllogisms. Those will be worth 5 points. So my assumption is each of those should take you about 5 minutes, and the total should add up to 60 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. Or we can all just stand here and stare silently at one another. I guess you're all staring. I guess you're all staring at me, right? And I'm the only one staring at everyone. But go ahead. You should be unmuted.
Yeah, I think we're all staring at our computer screens because we're looking at the study guide. But
yeah, that's true. You might be staring at that as well. That's a good point.
Yeah, the question I had is kind of related to the last thing that we were going over with the group
Yep.
work. I think I realized that I'm not quite sure as good at identifying the slippery slope fallacy as I thought
Okay.
I was. So could we hit that one again?
Absolutely. Let's hit it again. So let me go. I'll take us to a whiteboard. So, slippery slope fallacy. First of all, it's one of the fallacies of minimal support. All right. So it gives some reason to believe that the conclusion is true, but not very much. Not as much as it seems to. All right, so let's look at an example. Let's look at a really clear example of a slippery slope fallacy. If I'm trying to think of, if my mind immediately went to a bunch of coronavirus related ones, but that would probably be poor taste. So let's just do something low stakes. If we go to this movie tonight, we won't be able to study for our exam. Next thing you know, we'll fail out of college.
and be living on the street destitute. All right. I think that's 2 as an E in it. There we go. All right. So why is this a fallacy? All right. So, all right. Is it possible that if we go to the movie tonight, we won't be able to study for the exam? Sure, that's not impossible. And is it impossible that if we don't study for this exam, we'll end up failing out of college and end up living on the street? Sure, it's possible. Is it likely? No. Right? These consequences are possible consequences, but they're not likely ones. Right. Even if you actually just missed the exam outright, it would still be pretty unlikely that would end up resulting in you living on the street destitute, right? It's possible, it could happen. That's why it's a fallacy of minimal support, right? It is maybe a small risk, but it's a very small risk. The argument is making it seem like it's much more likely than it actually is. Right? And that's why it's a fallacy of minimal support, right? It is indeed giving you some reason to think that maybe we shouldn't go to the movie tonight, but it's nowhere near as good of a reason as it actually is presenting itself as, right? And that's the basic structure here. What usually slippery slope arguments, the way they're going to work, by not actually justifying why the consequences they say are going to follow from something actually are going to follow from it. And that's why, in this case, you see that really clearly. The reason, what's going on, like, if this to be a good argument, this person would have had to have given really careful reasons to think that all of these pretty outlandish implications are actually going to happen or actually going to follow from us going out to the movie tonight.
Okay.
I saw a hand up. Oh, go ahead, Robert. Go ahead.
Just on that same thing, we were talking about the slippery slope versus straw man on the Dilbert cartoon.
Uh-huh.
And I'm kind of wondering why that wouldn't be a slippery slope one, because obviously, you know, he says like you fire that 10%, you're going to go to the next 10%.
Right.
And they're just going to be body parts and hair or glands.
Right.
Or something.
Yeah.
Like, obviously, that's not going to happen. But like, why is that not a slippery slope? Because he's saying by one action, you're going to lead to a bunch of other preposterous options, you know, later.
Right. You're absolutely right. You actually could read, and people have argued successfully with me, that the number 3 is committing slippery slope fallacy as well. And it would especially be that last little part that we're just going to have to fire body parts and have torsos roaming around or whatever. That in particular would be the slippery slope part. That's not super plausible. I'd almost just say the bigger problem in this, in the case of that number 3, was misrepresenting what the pointy-haired boss originally intended. That's an even bigger problem, because even if Wally had cut out that last part, it still isn't a good reductio argument, because that wasn't what the pointy-haired boss meant in the first place. But you are right, you could read, especially those last couple of frames of it, you could read those as a slippery slope fallacy as well.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And Nathan, was that where you were going? I saw you had a hand up. Is that where you were going to go as well? Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's not unreasonable to read that as a slippery slope. I got just a chat notice real fast. So is the test going to be open note and on campus? Yes, it'll be exactly the same format as the first exam. So it'll be open note, open book, use whatever you'd like. It'll be on Canvas. And it should open up this afternoon by 5 at the latest. Hopefully I'll get it done earlier than that, but by the latest 5 o'clock this afternoon. And it'll close at midnight on Sunday. So you should have more than 48 hours to work on it. And all these times, I know we're not all in the same time zone anymore. All times are mountain time. Right? That's the time zone for all this. So it's midnight mountain time. Yeah, and it should be the same schedule as it was before break. Jacob, go ahead. You should be unmuted.
All right. Just quick question confirming. None of the reductio ad absurdum is going to be on the exam, right?
That's exactly right. None of the reductio ad absurdum arguments are going to be on the exam.
Okay. Thank you.
We're only going to go through what we did before spring break.
Okay. Thank you.
Ideally, we would have spent a whole day just doing review, but that was the day that got canceled. The class day that got canceled ended up being a review day. So.
Yeah.
Good. Any other things people would like to go over? Go ahead, Madison. Should be unmuted. There you go.
I was wondering if you could review how to tell if an argument is invalid by like contradiction and subaltern.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good. We could let's absolutely go over that. So again, I'm going to go to the whiteboard. All right. So we have that square of opposition thing. So let's just. Right. And that's sort of the first thing you should look at, right? So we've got the all SSP, no SSP, some S is not P, some S is B. All right. And the way the square of opposition works, the way to read it is it's just giving us all the possible relationships between these these four kinds of sentences. So this one's subalternation. These are contraries. These are subcontraries. And the middle two are contradictions. So the first step with any of these problems, right, just figure out what's the relationship between the categorical statements, right? That's sort of just step one. So let's look at it, just look at a concrete example. So let's say this was no S is P, therefore it is not the case that some S is P. Let's say this was the one you were being asked to evaluate. So the first thing to do, sort of step one, what's the relationship between the two kinds of categorical statements? What's the relationship between no SSP, some SSP? This is where you go to the square of opposition. So we'll just look at the chart. We've got no SSP up here, some SSP down here. What's the relationship? Contradiction, right? So the first thing you identify, these are contradictories. All right. So how are we doing so far? Is that part good?
Yes.
All right, awesome. Then we get to, it's not even exactly the tricky part. That actually is sort of the hardest part. If you get the relationship right, that's kind of, you've mostly done all of it. Now what we do is we're going to go back to that chart that I sent out to everyone before the break when we were going through these arguments, right? There's just a list of all the valid contradictions, right? All the valid contradictory relationships. So what's the relationship of contradiction? Contradictions, one has to be true, the other has to be false. And in this case, so let's write it out sort of with, what is the premise? The premise is saying no S is P is true. The conclusion is saying some S is P is false, right? And again, how did I know that? It is not the case, right? It is not the case that that's what's indicating that this one is supposed to be false. The fact that there's not and is not the case indicates that the no SSP is supposed to be true. All right. So with contradictions, one has to be true, the other has to be false. Is that what's being said by the argument? One is true, other's false. Yes, it is. So we've got a valid immediate inference. Right? And the other way, you can just go to the chart itself, and if you'll see, this is indeed one of the valid options on the chart. No SSP is true. That some SSP is false. So again, so how are we doing? Again, we can go spend as much time with this as you want. Do you have more? My guess is you probably have more questions. You probably want to discuss that more. So how are people feeling with that right next to start with? Does everyone have that chart? Would it be? Do you think it would be helpful if I emailed that to the class, that people might have misplaced it during all of the? Yeah. Okay. I'll email that chart. I'll email really all of the charts that I sent out, or all the handouts that I gave out earlier in the semester. I'll email those out to people because stuff might have gotten lost during moves and whatnot. But Madison, how are you feeling? Was that a helpful reminder, or would you like to discuss any of this more?
That helps. But the main thing to remember is that double negative, it is not the case. That always means the following statement is going to be false, right?
That's exactly right. Yes.
Okay, cool.
Exactly
okay, I think
right.
that helps a lot.
Okay, awesome. Good. Good. There was a chat question I saw. Can you mention some exam problems that people commonly miss? With this exam, there's nothing in particular. A lot of people are going to do just amazingly well in this exam because a lot of people just do really well with the deductive arguments. And then a lot of people are going to find the deductive arguments a little bit harder. And so they might need to put in a little bit more work to do well in it. That thing about it is not the case, meaning false, that's an important one, actually. That's a thing that people frequently overlook. Another thing that people overlook with the categorical syllogisms. So let's go back to the whiteboard for a second. Is it all right if I erase this? Does anyone want this left up, or need to copy it down more? Everyone good? Okay. Another common one with the categorical syllogisms. When I ask you to sort of standardize and formalize the argument, remember the conclusion is always the S and the P. That's where the conclusion always is. The M is always in the first two propositions. So let's write up. So maybe it would be, I don't know, some M is P, no M is S. Say it was this. When I'm going to give you this on the exam, I'm actually just not going to give you the M, the P, and the S. You're going to have to fill those in yourself. So what I might give you is some cats are dogs. No cats are mammals. Therefore, some mammals, or all mammals, are dogs. Right? I might give you that. You're going to have to turn this into that. It should be the easiest part of the problems, but it's actually the ones that frequently give people the most difficulty or give people the most trouble, right? And it's because they forget when you're doing this, the sort of standard formulation, the S is always the first category in the conclusion, and the P is always the second category in the conclusion. So if you remember that convention, this should be one of the easiest parts of the exam, but people frequently forget the convention. And the reason why the convention matters, just like on the quizzes, I'm going to give you a series of Venn diagrams. You're not going to have to draw your own. I'm going to give you a series of them, and you have to select the right one. And if we don't all mean the same thing by S, P, and M, you're not going to know what my Venn diagrams mean, and you won't be able to select the one that's the correct one. I would say those are probably the most common, almost just like simple things that I see people mixing up. Other than that, it's just not getting a fallacy right, or forgetting what necessary and sufficient means, things like that. Those are probably the most common, simple, easily correctable mistakes, though, that I frequently see. Someone asked me, can we still use accommodations for the disabilities in terms of the time limit? Absolutely, you can. I'll add in the ones that I have, but just like with you all, I also perhaps lost things or got things misplaced as a result of having to move everything home. So emailing me a reminder would certainly be helpful. Certainly would not be a horrible idea. I'll actually probably send out a general reminder about that when I make the exam publicly available for everyone. All right. So hopefully I answered those two chat questions. well enough. Any other questions people have? Anything else you'd like to go over? Go ahead, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, just a quick question following up on that question about it is not the case that, or
Yeah.
You said that means it's always false, but I interpreted that to mean it was like a sign switcher, like so if it had been false, it would turn it true. Is that incorrect, or is that?
That is actually correct, but you're never going to see a problem like that on this exam.
Okay, so
for this exam, because you're right, what it really is, technically it's a negation, is what what you were calling a sign switcher, and that's exactly right. That is exactly how negations work. But you're never gonna see one that it just isn't making the statement false for this exam. But if you do go on to the higher level logic classes, the 200 or 300 level logic classes, the way you're thinking of it, it's exactly right.
No, I could totally live with that. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead. You should be unmuted. Or maybe you're not. Okay, now you're unmuted.
Could you go over again the sufficient and necessary conditions?
Absolutely. Give me just 1 second. There's something else I actually just remembered I need to do real fast. But yes, I will absolutely. We can absolutely go over those. Sorry, Canvas is giving me some issues about something unrelated. I apologize for this. Very sorry about that. It's had some Canvas had something it urgently wanted me to do. Yes, let's go over necessary and sufficient conditions. All right. So a necessary condition is something that has to be there in order for something else to take place. So here's an example, right? Oxygen is a necessary condition for fire to burn. It's anything that sort of needs to be there, but by itself maybe isn't enough. If it's just a necessary condition, oxygen won't start fires. It's not enough to ensure that a fire is going to happen. But you're not going to get a fire going unless you have some oxygen there first. A sufficient condition, something that's only a sufficient condition, is the opposite. Right? Something that by itself is enough to make something else take place. So shooting me in the head with a very large gun is a sufficient condition to kill me. Right, that's enough, that'll do it, that'll bring it about. Nothing else needs to be present other than shooting me in the head with a large gun. Death will follow. But in this case, it's not a necessary condition. Why? Because I can die without being shot in the head with a large gun, right? I could get sick. I could fall off a cliff. I could this, that, and the other thing, right? There's other ways it could come about, so it's not necessary, but it is sufficient. It'll bring it about. It's enough to start it. There are then some things that are both necessary and sufficient. Right? So it's something that both has to be there. And something that's enough enough on its own for something else to happen. Usually this is when there's only one way that an event can ever take place. So here would be an example. In basketball, the ball going through the hoop is both necessary and sufficient for a basket to have been scored. You're not going to get a basket scored unless the ball goes to the hoop. And if the ball goes to the hoop, a basket has been scored, right? They go hand in hand. It's both, the ball going into the hoop is both necessary for a basket and it ensures that a basket has been ensured, right? And it's because in this case, it's really the only way a basket will ever get scored in basketball is if the ball goes through the hoop, right? So in this case, it's both necessary and sufficient. You can also have things that are neither. And this is where there's basically it's just none of the other ones. There's no necessary or sufficient connection between the two events. Right? So here would be an example of this, right? Studying for an exam is neither necessary nor sufficient to get an A on the exam. There are some people who will perhaps get an A even if they don't study, so it's not necessary. And unfortunately, I wish it weren't so, there are some people who will study really well and still won't get an A. So it's not sufficient, right? It's sort of neither. And this would be more what we call like a contributory cause. It maybe like makes it more likely you'll get an A, but it's not, it neither ensures it nor is it necessary for it. So that's the rough structure at least. So let's go back. So how is that? Do we have more questions? Do we want some more examples? What else would we like to talk about with those two?
Could you go over the example that's on the study guide itself?
Absolutely. I don't have the study guide with me actually, so can you remind me just what it was?
Yeah, it says, is getting less than 7 hours of sleep a necessary condition for someone to be in a bad mood or sufficient, or both or neither?
Good. Absolutely. Let's just go through this one actually. Let's just talk it through. Okay, so let's almost just go step by step. Is it a necessary condition? Right? Is the only time you're ever in a bad mood if you don't get enough sleep?
No.
So it's not necessary.
Okay.
So if it's not necessary right off the bat, is it both necessary and sufficient?
No.
Yeah, they can't be that either. So we can cross off necessary. If it's not necessary and sufficient. How about sufficient? Is it the case that every time you get less than 7 hours of sleep, you have to be in a bad mood?
Also no.
Probably not, right? I mean, there are some people, in my case, infuriating people, who are like perfectly bright and cheerful with 5 hours of sleep or 3 hours of sleep, and they're fine, right? not usually me. It's not. It doesn't have to happen. It doesn't always happen. I get less than 7 hours. I'm in a grumpy mood the next day. So it's not sufficient either.
Okay.
So what's the only option left? It's neither necessary nor sufficient.
Okay.
It's another example. It's sort of like a contributory cause, right? Like it makes it more likely that maybe you'll be in a bad mood, but it doesn't guarantee that you'll be in a bad mood. And it's not necessary for being in a bad mood. So it's a contributory cause, but it's neither necessary nor sufficient. Go ahead, Nathan.
So being sufficient has to guarantee that if something takes place, the next thing will happen. So
Absolutely.
you could be in a bad mood because you got less than 7 hours of sleep, but that doesn't necessarily make it sufficient.
That's right. To be sufficient, it's not just that there's a causal connection. It has to be a certain causal connection.
Okay.
There has to have been X before Y will ever happen. That it has to be that tight of a connection. So it's indeed quite rare to actually find sufficient conditions outside of logic classes, right? I mean, because usually things are just contributory causes. They're not really, and we're going to actually go over some causal arguments later in the semester. So actually sufficient causes are relatively rare. There aren't very many. That's why I keep going to sort of outlandish things like shooting me in the head with a gun or whatever, right? Like that one, that's a case where like, really, no, this will indeed ensure my death. All right, so how are we doing? How are we doing with these? Do we want to go over some more examples, maybe?
Can we do one more example?
Absolutely. Let's do one more example, and we'll do it the same way. We'll do it the same way, so we can sort of just talk our way through it. Skydiving without a parachute is, I'll actually make this a question though. Actually, no, I'll do a complete, that's too similar to the shooting me in the head with a gun example. Let me come up with a different example. Let me come up with a better example. Is failing to water my plants a necessary condition for killing them? A sufficient condition? Or both or neither? I'm still killing something. I wonder why I'm still killing something, but we'll go with it at least. This one's different enough that it should be interesting. All right, so let's do the exact same thing we just did. Just sort of go in the same order. Is it a necessary condition? Is the only way my plant's going to die if I fail to water it?
No, there are other ways.
Right, there are other ways. So it's not necessary. Or even for other ways for me to kill it even. All right. So again, it's not both necessary and sufficient. All right, if it's not necessary, it can't be both of them. How about sufficient? Is it enough to ensure that my plants will die if I don't water them?
Technically, yes.
Yeah, even like desert plants, like even if I have a cactus, eventually it's going to need some water. So if I never give it any water, indeed, it will die. So actually, yes, indeed, this is a sufficient condition. And in this case, we've said it's sufficient, it's not necessary, so therefore it's not both necessary and sufficient, and it's neither necessary nor sufficient. So in this case, there'll be multiple choices, so you would just select sufficient condition.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Is that helpful? Do you feel more confident?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'd actually recommend just talk it through that way. Go through it. Is it necessary? Is it sufficient?
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Absolutely. Any others we would like to go over?
Thanks again, Professor.
Absolutely. Have
Monday.
a good one. Yep. See you on Monday.
Yeah, I'm feeling good as well. Thank you.
All right. Absolutely. And if you find anything else in the next hour, I'll still